All right, what's up? It's been a minute since I posted a video. No one's gonna watch this, but let's jump right on into it. We have a trade here. Let's go. As my camera quality is awful. So the Los Angeles Clippers and the Portland Trail Blazers have made a trade today. It is the Los Angeles Clippers sending Eric Bledsoe, Justise Winslow, Keon Johnson, and a future second-round pick to the Portland Trail Blazers for Norman Powell and Robert Covington. The Clippers are also including a 2025 second-round pick from the Detroit Pistons. There's a lot to unpack here. I think the original report was that there was a trade with... I thought there was a different player that was involved other than Keon Johnson, but it is Keon, which kind of changes things up over me a little bit. But nonetheless, let's get into it. Before we do, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It's been like a month or two since I've posted anything, but I'm hoping that as we get into the trade season, we can get a lot more things going for the channel, making little YouTube short videos, breaking down some game stuff, and having fun. All right, let's jump into it. All right, so the first thing I want to break down here is the Clippers cap sheet. One thing to understand with them is that they are a luxury tax team. Their salaries are currently over the 136 mark that the NBA has. As you can see here on our website that we're using here is no trade clause. The salary cap or the luxury tax is 136. The apron is 143. The Clippers right now are 168, 170. So they add on a little bit more dollars to their payroll currently, while the Blazers don't have to pay as much in the luxury tax with such low contracts coming in. Let's get the contract talk out of the way. I think it's a win for the Blazers in the sense that they're just not going to really... I think they've understood the cap of this team, and so getting rid of Covington and getting rid of Norman Powell's contract are directions that they need to take, and that's what they've done. And let's pull up Portland real quick here. So Portland, 15 up to 20 in 2025-26 for Norman Powell. Not a horrible contract. I think once we get to the 2025 season, I think there will be a lot more anticipated salary cap. I mean, just the projections here are that it goes up by 18 million and then 30 million. Sorry, that's 22 million. And then it gets up to 30 million for the 2025-26 season. So, like, it's going to be a different league in a sense. Like, that's another big contract. And so does this Powell contract look as bad? I don't think so for the Clippers moving forward. All right, so here's the other thing that is interesting about this. I believe Covington is on... I think they have the bird rights for Covington. So if the Clippers wanted to re-sign him, they could. Maybe to a similar deal. But we're seeing Portland now become sellers. They realize that this is not the team that you can build around Damian. And I don't think a Damian Lillard trade is going to happen anytime soon. But I think he's loyal, and I think they will say, kind of give him the Brad Beal treatment in the sense of, we're going to remove everybody and create cap space for the future. If you want to recruit a guy, awesome, go for it. But we're also going to try to kind of trade for better salaries, for better situation. And Norman Powell on this team, being like the third to fourth best player, I don't think that's his role. And I think you look at his salary and you're like, oh, that's not great. But then you look at what he provides for the Clippers, unreal. Same with Covington. And the fact that the Clippers are now going to be able to erase that Bledsoe deal, this is insane. I think this is some of the best front office work that we can see in the NBA. It is wild. What happens here is that trade that the Clippers made last offseason here, where they moved away from Beverly, they moved away from Eric Bledsoe, or they acquired Eric Bledsoe. That was insane because they were able to they were able to reduce their salary, and they were also at the same time be able to be flexible for the future. Let's look at that Eric Bledsoe trade just because I'm curious. About it. Oh, was he from the Grizzlies? That's right, he was from the Grizzlies. Oh, here it is. So Rondo, Atoru, and Beverly. So this trade here, where they were able to send Eric Bledsoe for Patrick Beverly, Rondo. So they were able to turn two older guards that they weren't going to use. Rondo's not even getting like crazy playing time in Cleveland. Everyone was freaking out when he got there, but not as great as what everybody thought he was going to be. So Clippers get rid of those two guys. Beverly goes to Minnesota in a different trade, but then the Clippers now are using Eric Bledsoe's contract to be able to bring in two more great players, like really solid role players. Like Covington's still a solid defender, and Powell has been just at the very least an average defender in the league. And I think their impacts are really, really good when they're not on a bad Portland team that has just been really, really bad defensively. And so I think maybe their defensive numbers are a little skewed towards that side, just because the Blazers are just bad in general. But the interesting thing that comes to mind for me is just now I wonder exactly what's happening with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. It looks to me as if they're trying to build what to me is like a beautiful constructed roster, where they're basically going to have two main stars and then continue to have like these really strong role players. Marcus Morris, big time in the playoffs for a few games. Kennard, we've seen what he's capable of doing. Reggie Jackson was great in the playoffs last year. Now they're adding Robert Covington, and they're providing Norman Powell as well. Like, this is insane for the Clippers. I understand why the Blazers do it. I think the rebuild is started there. And maybe not the rebuild, but the retool. Is there a move where we get... is there a move where the Clippers are able to is there a move where the Blazers are able to move off of CJ McCollum and off of Yusuf Nurkic? So let's really quickly go through the players. I think it's a slam dunk, home run out of the park kind of a thing for the Clippers. They add players. I think they get the bird rights to Robert Covington so they can re-sign him with no penalty, or with no restriction, I should say. And then they get Norman Powell, who's really solid and is a player that I've always liked. So those two guys are headed to LA. Keon Johnson, Eric Bledsoe, Justise Winslow. Let's talk about them. Winslow, I think you can maybe get excited about Winslow if you're a Blazers fan, but just keep it tempered. He's still 25 years old, as we can see here via Google. He's just had so many injuries, and I think peak Winslow is pretty okay, but I just don't know how great he can be. Keon Johnson's obviously the big time thing. I think he's still a teenager, right? Like, let's look up Keon real quick. Keon's 19 years old. He's not turning 20 until March for another month. So you still got this young guard coming in. Was a guy who everybody was saying was going to go in the lottery. Ends up dropping, and the Clippers land him. And so that's a good piece. So you're basically getting a second rounder, a nice lottery pick. Justise Winslow, who again I just don't think is going to be the same again after the injuries, and I just don't know what he's providing anymore. And then Eric Bledsoe. And Eric Bledsoe's contract is interesting as well, because if you look with his contract, it's the rest of this season, so like the last half of this year, and then next year they can not guarantee his money, and they would only have to pay him $3 million, or a little bit under $4 million. So this 18 number or 19 number for the Blazers next season can be reduced to 4, because there's no way that they're basically gonna use his services, have another guard in the rotation with Damian being out pretty much the rest of the year, and then they will move forward with waiving him or not guaranteeing his contract for next season. and then he will go do whatever, probably go join a contender, and the Blazers will have some cap space to work with as well. So I understand the trade. I just, if you were to tell me the Clippers were able to acquire just Norman Powell, I'd have been like, wow, that's good. That's really good. Or just Robert Covington, I'm like, well, wow, that's really a solid pickup, especially when you talk about teams that wanted Covington. This trade is really interesting, but I would have to say the clear winner is the Clippers, and I think you just start to look towards the future now if you're the Blazers. Pretty interesting. You want to see what the next moves are for Portland. But for the Clippers right now, I wonder if they know something with Kawhi and Paul George and their injuries. And if they're just like, okay, let's stack the deck a little bit and bring in some players. And they might not even result in us winning this year. Like anything, like even a series. But then add Kawhi and Paul George on top of a rotation that includes Ivica Zubac, includes Brandon Boston, who they have this year, who they drafted and has been solid for them. Terrence Mann, Hartenstein's been good. Nicolas Batum. I think, did I already say Marcus Morris and Luke Kennard and Reggie Jackson? Like, this team is stacked. Getting 2 more startable players along with their current core. Insane. And look, you look at a roster like that in LA going into the offseason. Maybe there's some veterans that want to go join forces for the Clippers. It may not result in something huge, but it will result into something that will pay dividends, I think, in the long run for the Clippers. Same with the Blazers, but it's just 2 different moves. I'm surprised that the Clippers were able to get both Covington and Powell, and especially from a Western Conference team. Like, Portland was trading with a Western Conference team. That's crazy to me. But the rebuild is going. The retool, the reshuffle, whatever you want to call it in Portland, it's happening. And we'll see. There's some rumors about McCollum being dealt. I don't know if that will happen at all. Like, there was that random report about how the Pelicans want a young guard, and McCollum was named. I don't know how doable that is. Nurkic, I don't know if he should be a part of their long-term future. He's also an unrestricted free agent, which makes his contract a little bit more movable in the sense that if you can find a team that wants him, they can have him. And yeah, it's just it's interesting. But you look at the salary cap sheet for the Blazers. Removing Powell now opens up so much more room in 2023 in a couple of seasons for the Blazers. Really, next year the only people who are under contract will be Greg Brown, Nasir Little. They're going to probably have to pay Anthony Simons, which I think they're fine with because he's been playing good in Damian Lillard's absence. Larry Nance, who I think is potentially a movable contract, and then McCollum and Damian Lillard. And now they've added a young lottery player that they weren't able to draft because they've been giving away so many draft picks. So I think a good trade for both teams. I'm a little surprised that, again, 2 players from Portland, their normal rotation, are now going to the Clippers, and that the Clippers were able to pull that off. But the Clippers also give up Keon Johnson. So I think a kind of a win for each side, but I'll give the Clippers like an A+, honestly. And I will give the Blazers probably like a B+. Is there anything more that you could have gotten? Like, they don't get a future pick at all. They're just getting a young prospect in Keon, which I think is solid. But you just don't know, right? Do we look back at this trade and say, man, the Clippers' 9-man rotation is definitely better than what Keon Johnson's providing the Blazers. So, and he's another guard with Damian and CJ and Anthony Simons. So, a little weird. But anyway, that's it. Doesn't look like many people watch this, but it's all right. We're uploading again. So anyway, feel free to subscribe to the channel. We will provide a little bit more NBA content, probably through shorts or just very small uploads as opposed to live streams. But I wanted to do this because I was pumped up about this trade, and we're going to have more. It's going to be fun. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next video. All right, we'll see you.